I recently watched an entertaining but deeply flawed video about accusations made toward the left about hating free speech, and more specifically about restrictions on hate speech, by a YouTuber called Contra. I've put some links to mirrors of it in the description because the original was removed by YouTube's automated moderation system following being flagged by viewers. So if you want to watch the whole thing, you can take your pick of any of those links. And I do recommend you watch it because I'll be discussing it without including too many snippets here. The video is very snazzily and creatively put together in terms of production, but as an argument, it's a bit of a mess. One issue is that despite taking the time to lay out the differences between them at one point, Contra flits too quickly between different kinds of hate speech prohibition, making it a bit unclear at times which kind is being considered at any given moment. Like I said, you should go watch it for yourself, but I'd say this muddying mostly happens between informal social pressure and university or workplace rules. On top of that problem, we're told in the video that words like Islamophobia have a silencing effect on bigots. So what justifies a higher level of prohibition? The differences in venue or forum for speech are also not given enough consideration, I think. The clearest red flag being this snippet.
I constantly hear from women, trans, and gender non-conforming people that they've thought of making YouTube videos, but they just don't want to deal with the hate, the trolls, the constant misogyny and attacks on gender identity, the public shaming, and genderqueer and feminist cringe compilations, and so they just avoid speaking up on YouTube altogether. So in a sense, these people are being silenced by the misogynistic and transphobic atmosphere, in the same way that your average YouTube shitlord would probably feel pretty alone and silenced in a gender studies class with 19 women complaining about sexist men.
Mate, those videos aren't in the same room as you, talking instead of you. Bruh, they're not gonna get up in your face. I would say that the shitlord in gender studies should just not be a little bitch. But Contra is comparing apples and oranges here. He's comparing the YouTube situation to a different situation any shitlords viewing would be more likely to think they'd feel uncomfortable in. When, really, the folks scared to put stuff on YouTube are as silenced as the shitlords on YouTube when there are people calling them racist, sexist, and whatever else. Or consider this. My buddy, Count Dankula, is going to court on a hate crime charge and potentially faces a year in prison for a video he put on YouTube of his girlfriend's dog doing Nazi salutes. And he's still making videos. He's facing being locked away for a year and having the black mark of hate crime on his record, and that hasn't deterred him from continuing to express himself. Boo-hoo. Someone might put you in a cringe comp and massively amplify your speech. If you're going to be bothered by that, be bothered they're making money off of your video. And dealing with that stuff must mean full-on seek and destroy style censorship. The premise that speech existing somewhere, that media being available to those who want to see it, silences a group we need to protect the speech of, has pretty horrifying implications when it comes to solving the alleged problem. We're not talking about someone harassing you in a place you're stuck at, like repeatedly bothering you at work. We've wandered into the territory of talking about the existence of published media being a problem. To my eyes, these two things are vastly different, and I find it concerning when someone so carelessly jumps between them, including, ostensibly, in Contra's conclusion.
So when I see people defending Richard Spencer and acting like the Declaration of Human Rights has gone up in flames because of campus or workplace hate speech prohibitions, while saying absolutely nothing about the way hate speech itself can be silencing, I don't see neutral defenders of free speech. I see people who have taken a side. And it's not the right side.
Why don't those people who talk about deplatforming and anti-hate speech policy also talk more about less concrete stuff, like how insensitive speech silences others? Well, Contra's perspective is based on the assumption that those people believe hate speech has a silencing effect, which is further based on the assumption that they believe words like Islamophobia can have a silencing effect.
If you're willing to grant that words like Islamophobia can have a silencing effect, you should also be willing to grant that small acts of racism, sexism, homophobia, and so on can likewise suppress the speech of marginalized people.
I do actually think that's fair to say, and it does apply to a lot of people. However, there are also a lot of free speechy people that little if doesn't apply to. A lot of us are like shame-resistant free speech aides, and while Contra's video works as a general attack on the right, it doesn't work as a defense of the left against accusations of hating free speech, or at least not being that great at defending it. pointing out a particular group and sort of saying, they do what I do and think what I think, but side with racists instead of the marginalized, so I'm a little bit better than them, is pretty lame to me, because I reject this claim.
If you adopt a sophisticated view of free speech, you have to contend with the following contradictory situation. There are many instances where you have to choose between suppressing one person's speech or another's. The fact is, there is no true neutral when it comes to free speech. It's literally impossible to protect everyone's speech equally because some forms of speech tend to dampen other forms of speech. So there comes a point where you have to choose whose side you're on. In this case, do you want to defend the speech of misogynists or the speech of women? Racists or people of color? Homophobes and transphobes or queer people? And I'm not talking about passing laws here, I'm talking about establishing norms of discourse.
Nah, it's not if you adopt a sophisticated view of free speech, but if you adopt exactly the view of free speech laid out in Contra's video, that you have to contend with those contradictions. And what does establishing norms of discourse mean? Contra says, not law. But watching the vid, it seems like it includes everything from workplace policy to online moderation. Anyway, let's finally get to the point of this video. Why do I reject all that? Early in his video, ContraPoints pulls a little trick that illustrates a large part of my disagreement. Check this out.
So not only does a Holocaust denier have a right to speak, but, in this view, because what they say is marginal,
what they say,
we actually have a duty to provide special protections to make sure that what they have to say is heard.
What they have to say.
But also the social pressures that can silence nonconformists in marginal viewpoints in subtle ways.
Viewpoints.
And you know, Dave, I like that you and Hitchens have this very advanced conception of free speech. The idea that we should protect and perhaps even amplify minority viewpoints is one that I share.
Viewpoints again.
So great, we actually start from a point of philosophical agreement. Where we disagree is in the application, the main point of contention being which speakers are truly marginalized and in need of special protection.
Ah, speakers. See what's been done there? You just watched minority viewpoints being morphed into meaning viewpoints minorities hold. And this is where I think problems start to creep in. Instead of free speech referring to something like a universal human duty to protect the sharing of ideas, it becomes just another feministy identity and power deal, where authority is supposed to cater to the oppressed. Minorities say they aren't going to speak unless someone else is silenced. You silence that person. Though, of course, in practice, protecting the expression of the oppressed can become sticky because apparently some minorities hold the wrong views. Seriously, though, a risk that comes with the idea that protection of speech should be based on the speaker is that they might not hold a minority or nonconformist view, but still act all afraid to speak unless you do something. The approach of protecting speakers also leads me to be confused about where anonymous speech would fit in. If we're defending speech based on its source, how is speech from someone whose identity is unknown ranked in that system? Particularly on the internet, anonymity is an incredible tool for any marginalized group. It can protect them against everything from social backlash to unjust laws that ban speech. Given that, for example, I personally know a non-white white supremacist, and that there are certainly all sorts of views shared by people of all kinds of demographics, how, in the context of anonymous communication, do you protect the right speaker's speech? Do you then protect everything? Well, then the speakers you see silenced can just speak anonymously. Do you protect nothing? Well, that sucks. Do you try to maintain your standards, but discriminate purely based on content of the speech? In which case, I'd have to start to suspect the whole protecting vulnerable minorities thing is more emotional manipulation than anything, and is just a way to get people to go along with arbitrary personal preferences by pretending there is a clear and obvious way to protect all these people that lines up with that. And let's say someone's anonymously posted online about their rage against Muslims and Islam, or anything that ContraPoints might consider to be Islamophobic and so silencing of a marginalized group. If you wipe it away, and it was actually posted by an atheist in an Islamic country with blasphemy laws, have you protected the right people's speech then? Have you still taken the right side? It seems to me like this approach is made into a bit of a mess by modern technology, globalization, and anonymity. And personally, I think what's presented by Contra overall is what any good fedora-wearing Redditor would call a false dichotomy. No, You don't have to side with either the marginalized or the oppressors in the context of defending free expression. In fact, I'd say it's that you can't consistently do. In contrast to Contra's approach, if we primarily have a duty specifically to protect speech and views and opinions rather than protect speakers, then I think you have to consider that duty extends to the person holding those views. The rest of us, the listeners, of course have a duty not to actively silence speakers, and we should all support the existence of accessible platforms and forums, in real life, online, and whatever else. But speakers also have a responsibility to the rest of us too, if they genuinely want to speak or think they should, put their ideas out there. If a speaker, regardless of race, gender, or whatever else, doesn't speak because of other speech that's out there that isn't, for example, a credible direct threat to them, or something like that, because that's where I draw a line, then they are unjustifiably self-censoring. They have been silenced, but not in any part by other people's expression. They've been silenced by themselves. They have, by choice without coercion, covered their own mouth, and in doing so, they have also covered the ears of everyone who would listen to them. The problem, the flaw, is entirely theirs. From my perspective, for example, the people Contra says aren't publishing videos simply due to what else has been published on YouTube are doing something wrong. Likewise, a person who doesn't share their thoughts purely out of fear of being called racist, sexist, or Islamophobic, when they otherwise would have and have the means to do so, is also doing something wrong by not expressing themselves. You wouldn't view someone having stage fright and backing out of a speech as an audience silencing that person, would you? Probably not. But I think that if you truly believe in what Contra is suggesting, then you should. In any case, while the speak free or die attitude I like to promote has a high chance of coming with consequences, the or die bit is relatively unlikely to come into play, unless you live in some backwards hellhole. And I do think that this approach mandates equal, consistent protection for all expression without running into the messes that Contra's approach does. It also, as a bonus for my more libertarian viewers, mandates less intervention from authority as a requirement to maintain it. Yeah, some people will fail to fulfill their duty to protect speech. They will cross a line and use threats of violence to stop others. They'll censor media and they'll self-censor. But that's a problem with people and not with this perspective. Same way any sort of rules can be broken, misapplied, or simply not followed. It's also worth bearing in mind that this certainly doesn't mean you can't choose to support people who lack courage. I'd say it's good to do so. If someone, anyone, comes to me and tells me they want to put something out there, but they're nervous, I'm not going to say, "You fucking coward! How dare you not speak your mind? You're letting your right to free expression atrophy! You need to flex it like a muscle!" I'm going to come at it more like, well, what are you worried about? What if you were to post it anonymously? And so on. 1, doing it because that's probably most effective in service of their speech. And 2, I genuinely, personally just really want people to say what they want to say. Yeah, that includes horrific stuff sometimes, perhaps including from myself, depending on who's judging it. But wouldn't you rather know that a person's thinking that, whatever it is? If an opinion is being hunted down and exterminated wherever it's expressed, which is an increasing concern on the web, then ideally something would be done to halt that censorship and protect the sharing of that thought, no matter who is thinking or sharing it. Now, things get really scrambly depending on whether you're talking about the net, real life, specific events, but generally, every platform doesn't need to allow everything. But what isn't allowed on any given platform should be clear to all and enforced fairly and transparently. Additionally, it should ideally be possible, without any special barrier, to have a platform or forum for anything accessible to anyone, with a very narrow and clearly defined set of exceptions. Obviously, there's more to it, and I started to step down a path where this video could increase in length exponentially, but I think I've said enough, hopefully clearly enough, for the purpose of this video. So, while I'd say that ContraPoints is right about a certain kind of person that certainly does exist in some number, I'd say he is absolutely wrong to suggest that there is no neutral approach to the protection of free speech. And while the outcome of such a neutral approach may very well reflect existing inequalities, the solution to this imbalance, if you believe it's something that should be solved, must not be to silence any speech. But, as usual, that's just another one of my harmful opinions.